Hello, hi, how are you? And welcome to another podcast by George. Well, come on in. Your PBG reporter is still out there on the campaign trail following these presidential candidates around. And today, we're going to have some audio from a couple of campaign stops by U.S. Senator Cory Booker, one of the announced candidates for president for 2020. I want to start off, in case you're not that familiar with Cory Booker, just reading from his U.S. Senate website and his bio, and his bio is huge. I mean, this guy, he has got the bona fides when it comes to his background. He's an interesting individual in a number of ways, and you'll see a little bit of it here. But he's highly educated, widely experienced, a former athlete, was a D1 tight end, played at Stanford, believe it or not, and just an interesting dude. So here's the bio. Cory Booker was raised in Harrington Park, living his life as a proud New Jerseyan. And before his campaign stop, the Boss was playing. I kind of like that. Bruce Springsteen. That was cool. Well, after graduating from Northern Valley Regional High School, Booker received his undergraduate degree from Stanford University, where he played on the varsity football team. While at Stanford, he also was awarded a Rhodes Scholarship and went on to study at the University of Oxford, where he received an honors degree in history. Booker then completed his education at Yale Law School, receiving his JD in 1997. After law school, Booker moved to Newark, where he still lives to this day, and started a nonprofit organization to provide legal services for low-income families and help tenants take on slumlords, improve living conditions, and stay in their homes. At the age of 29, Booker was elected to the Newark City Council from the city's Central Ward. In the 17 years since, he's worked at the local and national levels to improve the lives of New Jerseyans and Americans. Starting in 2006, Booker proudly served as Newark's mayor for more than 7 years. During his tenure, the city entered its largest period of economic growth since the 1960s, and Newark was on its ass, folks. It really was. I'm not so sure that it's doing that good yet. But in addition, overall crime declined, and the quality of life for residents improved due to initiatives such as more affordable housing, new green spaces and parks, increased educational opportunities, and more efficient city services. You know, the other thing that gets mentioned once in a while, and he'll mention it in passing, but he doesn't want to dwell on it, but it's a remarkable thing. When he was the mayor of Newark, he was driving by an apartment building that was on fire, and he ran in there and saved a woman, I think, from one of the upper stories in that building, and suffered some injuries of his own saving her. I mean, the guy's like a mayor out of a Batman comic book, but he did that during his tenure as the mayor of Newark. Senator Booker, it says, has established himself as an innovative and bipartisan problem solver, committed to developing collaborative solutions that address some of our most complex challenges. Whether it's advocating for more federal resources to modernize New Jersey's transportation system, securing funds to continue the long recovery from Superstorm Sandy, or ensuring that our communities are safe from the effects of pollution and climate change, Booker has proven his steadfast commitment to standing up for what matters most. He's also emerged as a national leader in the congressional push for common-sense criminal justice reform, advocating for front-end sentencing reforms, pushing for the banning of juvenile solitary confinement in federal facilities. You know where that's going on, down at the border, and he paid a visit down there. The guy's fluent in Spanish, so hearing him talk about his border visit and seeing what's going on down there and talking to the people, and the fact that he can do it with fluid Spanish is interesting. This guy's something else. And spearheading legislation to make the hiring process fair for a formerly incarcerated individual. Now, he's also partnered with colleagues on both sides of the aisle to create a number of economic proposals, from increased small business investment to apprenticeship programs, with the hopes of fostering greater economic mobility and opportunity for individual Americans. Well, okay, so a lot of that is covered in his stump speeches and presentations here in Iowa. We won't be able to get to all of that on the podcast, of course. But I wanted to start off with a little audio from his stump speech down in Indianola. Now, it was interesting on a couple of different levels. Number one, he didn't use a microphone for his initial stump speech presentation here. So the audio that you're going to hear initially here is not that good. For the Q&A coming up later, it's very good. So stay with me, and I'll try to explain a little bit of what's going on here. But this first clip I wanted to include because it's in his stump speech, and he's talking about something that I've talked about in the past that I don't think gets enough notice or understanding or appreciation. And that is, I believe so much of what America is today has been fostered and formed by Hollywood and television. And people in other countries will tell you that, but people here just don't even recognize it. Maybe it's because it's too close to them. But I believe that America, the two sides of the political spectrum, your right-wingers and your left-wingers. Your right-wingers are those people in those red states that you see on the electoral maps that live out there in the far-flung agricultural western states. Not a lot of people around. Rugged individualism is what they prize. And it goes back to being a rancher, being a farmer, all of these solitary pursuits. Well, of course, they don't recognize that, particularly with farmers and ranchers, a lot of that was given to them, and they're just trying to protect it, don't want it being taken away. They certainly don't want any of it taken away in the form of taxes to be given to other people. And so they prize the mythos of John Wayne, and it really is a mythos. I mean, the guy was a movie actor, but that rugged individualist that doesn't need anybody, that takes matters head on and deals with things himself. You know, the Louis L'Amour hero. That's who they like. And, of course, they elected Ronald Reagan, who starred in those cowboy movies. And I think sometimes they have a problem separating reality from fiction, from Hollywood and television. And, yeah, those are a couple of their real, Charlton Heston, another big movie actor that was elevated to the head of the NRA, for God's sake, in our country. These are the kind of people that the right-wingers gravitate towards. And television in particular, but also Hollywood, has molded people's thinking when it comes to cowboys, when it comes to doctors, when it comes to law enforcement, when it comes to even government. And I think they're heavily influenced by that. All right, so let's go back to the 50s and 60s for the left side of the political spectrum. These folks were from urban areas. Yeah, they watched television and movies, and they were influenced by that also, but they're much more communal. They're much closer to one another just by geography, and they have to get along. They have to collaborate. And they were influenced because of that much more, I think, by the communal Haight-Ashbury anti-Vietnam hippie movement, for lack of a better description. That's what they gravitated towards. And my point is, they were influenced not by John Wayne, more by John Lennon, more by Bob Dylan, more by the great literary, the great writers. They're influenced more by news media channels, legitimate news, network news, newspapers, books, those types of things. They're not, out there on a horse riding a fence row someplace trying to keep the doggies in. They're trying to get along with somebody else so that they can survive in these large urban areas, in these inner cities. And so here are the two perspectives coming out of the 50s and 60s, formed by media. Largely television and Hollywood on one side for the right, and the rugged individualism of the one John Wayne, and the left being heavily influenced by the music of the day. And I find this to be true a lot. I do. I find that a lot of my Democratic friends really take the idealism and the lyrics of music and poetry and books and movies and all that very literally. It's very important to them. The right-wingers, not so much. They didn't particularly care for that music back in the 60s or 70s. They weren't influenced by it at all, but they were influenced by John Wayne and Ronald Reagan. Count on it. And Cory Booker starts off his presentation down in Indianola talking about this difference between the rugged individualism of the mythos, as I call it, John Wayne type approach, and the approach of the other John, or Johns held dearly by the left, John Lennon and John Kennedy. Listen to this.
And so who are we as a nation today to let people divide us, to pit us against each other, to try to weaken us and tell us there's things we can't do when American history is a perpetual testimony to the achievement of the impossible? But I have to tell you, we've done great individual accomplishments here. But rugged individualism and self-reliance, I'm sorry, that didn't get us to the moon. It didn't beat the Nazis. It didn't beat Jim Crow. These are things that we did together. By having more courageous empathy for one another, by having a sense of civic grace. I'm calling right now for us to create a more beloved community. Why do I use words like that? It's because patriotism is love of country, and you cannot love your country unless you love your fellow countrymen and women.
So this Cory Booker guy, I mean, he's a big hugger. This guy is all about peace, love, and understanding. You know, and that's right out of the 60s hymnal. I mean, we're talking about things that apparently have gotten lost along the way, but he's not afraid to talk about them. And the people on the right, of course, they don't want to hear any of that stuff at all. They don't care anything about peace, love, and understanding. I mean, you can't even talk about love around them. They're going to get really weird about it. But Cory Booker doesn't have any problem talking about it. And again, this audio is not so good because it's coming wild straight off the floor during his stump speech. But we'll pick up some Q&A here later where he's actually got the microphone, and it sounds a lot better. But let's continue on here and hear Cory Booker talk a little bit more about this beloved nation concept that he's talking about during his stump speeches. This is great stuff.
No, we are called to be a beloved community. Tolerance just stomachs people's right to be different. I tolerated the cold I had last week. Love says, I see you. You are not alone. If your children have great public education, have access to health care, my children are better for it. Love says what Martin Luther King says, that we're all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a common garment of destiny, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So here we are in this nation right now. Politics is pitting us against each other, being divided along racial lines yet again, being divided along geographic lines yet again. And what is this election going to be about? Is it going to be about one person in one office? I refuse to campaign that way. I'm telling you right now, the problems that we hear about and we talk about, attacks on public education, inadequate health care, the fact that children in many places around America can find unleaded gasoline more easily than unleaded water. The fact that we have, as my friend says, a criminal justice system that treats you better if you're rich and guilty than if you're poor and innocent. The fact that we now have a nation where people work hard, full day work, but don't get a fair day's wages. They find themselves with more month at the end of their money than money at the end of their month. That is not a beloved community. A beloved community says, you know what? In this nation, healthcare is a right and child poverty is a wrong. In this nation, a beloved community says that we can find a way not just to have great schools, but to invest in education so that every child can have a public school that's a cathedral of learning, and dear God, the teachers get paid for the value they're bringing to our economy. Not what's happening now with our teachers literally not being able to afford often to live in the communities, or often find themselves struggling just to pay off their debt. A beloved community rejects that. A beloved community just doesn't find trillions of dollars to send people off to war, but takes care of their veterans when they come home with housing and jobs.
Okay, so let's move along to the Q&A portion of the event. And, you know, sometimes you get good Q&A, sometimes you don't. It just depends upon the question. Sometimes they're way too softball and easy. Sometimes they're things that have already been discussed. And then sometimes they're kind of weird. And so here's, and this is something that you wouldn't normally get in another report. So this is a Cory Booker stump speech. This is not a town hall meeting of a politician. It's not an opportunity to get together and argue. Well, some guy there wants to ask a question of Cory Booker. I think he's like the second question asked. And he wants to know if Cory Booker is ready to apologize for his performance, that's a quote, during the Kavanaugh hearings. Now, if you can believe that, there's a couple of hundred people here, Democratic loyalists, listening to a guy give a standard stump speech for President of the United States, and there's some guy in the crowd that wants to revisit the divisiveness, the agitation of the Kavanaugh hearings. Now, there is a little bit of a silver lining to this because I'm thinking to myself, okay, how's he going to handle this? Because this is weird. It's obviously confrontational. This guy is obviously trying to get under his skin by asking him if he's ready to apologize, number one, and number two, calling it a performance. But here's how Cory Booker handled it, and I thought it was interesting. Maybe most importantly, it's not something that you'll see or hear anywhere else. This is the kind of thing that the news media, for better or for worse, they tend to ignore these moments. But I wanted to bring this to you. So listen to how Cory Booker responds to this guy.
So first of all, sir, you call it a performance. I stood every single day and was outraged about those hearings were run. This is the first time in American history.
Senator Grassley conducted an unfair hearing in your opinion?
And yes, he did. Yes, he did. Yeah, sir, when you're not even releasing, I was threatened to be kicked out of the Senate for challenging him on not even releasing. It's like hiring somebody for a job and you only get to see 10% of their resume. They kept secret hundreds of thousands. They kept secrets, hundreds of thousands. Sir, I'm not here to get an argument, and I believe in the old saying that you don't have to attend every argument you're invited to. But I am proud of my performance, or as you call it, but I'm proud of what I did to fight to make sure someone who was not qualified to sit on the Supreme Court did not get there. It was a mistake. And if I'm president of the United States, we will put judges on the court that respect women and respect the institution.
Well, that was interesting on a couple of different levels. Number one, the guy was asking Booker whether or not he thought Senator Grassley had conducted an unfair hearing. Well, just the fact that he was conducting the hearing was unfair because the dude had blocked Barack Obama from getting his nominee even a hearing. Right off the top, it was not fair for the guy that was at the head of that effort to hold the Kavanaugh hearings. That's number one. So was it unfair? Yeah, it was unfair. Secondly, the point that Cory Booker was trying to make there is they withheld all of those documents and files, only looking into the background 10% of what they probably should have. And what that guy wanted to say, well, you could look at all of his court rulings, and really that's all that's important. Just investigate those. No. Here's the thing. That is one of the most important jobs in the land, one of the most highly sought after jobs in the land. It's a lifetime appointment that affects every man, woman, and child in this country. You hold up a microscope to those people. You look at everything. You certainly don't prohibit people from looking into files and documents related to the appointment. And that's exactly what they did. Forget about the partisanship here. That's just basic stuff. I mean, yeah, if you're hiring a guy to rake the leaves in your yard, you can get by knowing 10% about him. But not a Supreme Court justice. I mean, get real. And anybody that watched that thing, and I've talked about this on an earlier podcast, my God, it's obvious and apparent that he was lying about things that guys standing on a street corner know. The Devil's Triangle. He said that was a drinking game. Are you kidding me? That's a lie. He's under sworn testimony in front of Congress telling lies, and he wants to be a Supreme Court justice? Really? Is that how that works? And refusing to ask questions and carrying on like a convicted drug dealer on the stand, tearing up and blubbering about how he liked beer, and we made that guy a lifetime Supreme Court justice. Honest to God. I mean, and this guy wants to bring it up at a Cory Booker stump speech. And of course, to me, the real insult to the injury here is the fact that this same august body, Congress, impeached Bill Clinton for oral sex in the Oval Office that affected no one other than his wife probably, and they justify that because he lied under oath about that. The one thing you shouldn't ever ask a guy about is whether or not he's fooling around on his wife, and they did that, caught him under oath, obviously a mistruth, but what the hell? I mean, come on. What impact did that have on every U.S. American? Did he lie about anything else under oath? Nah, just that. This guy lied under oath and became a Supreme Court justice. Honest to God. Well, anyway, I don't want to go back to the Kavanaugh hearings. But that guy brought it up. So there you go. Well, let's move along. And let's talk about something that's very near and dear to the heart of Podcast by George. And you know what that is? It's climate change. This is what Cory Booker had to say about that.
We have a planet in crisis. We have about 12 years to do something very significant, or else we can see cataclysmic consequences for that. Cataclysmic consequences. How do I know that? Because the U.S. military is preparing for that eventuality. And you see other things happening, which is like flood insurance rates, fire insurance rates, all going up. Areas, low-lying places from Florida to Atlantic City, New Jersey, are already seeing the devastating impacts. My fishing industry off the coast of New Jersey is already seeing the fish that they used to be able to catch shifting to the north, and eventually are going to be Connecticut's fishing industry, because you see with global warming what's happening with a lot of our fish. This is something that I live every day and haven't not done anything about it. And in fact, I've been one of those people standing up for things that we should do. So first of all, I'm a supporter of the Green New Deal, because I believe that we need to have bold actions. And for those people who want to criticize it, I often think that sometimes it's like John F. Kennedy saying we're going to the moon, and somebody saying, well, I don't necessarily agree with your rocket design. No, we all should lean in. If these ideas aren't good, give your own ideas, because when we get this to legislation, we all have to get behind it. So I'm going to support that. I'm going to give you quick other things. I'm going to go on to the next question. First of all, the things that have been undone by this administration, we need to redo. The Clean Power Plan, the fuel efficiency standards, rejoining the Paris Accords, all of those things which backtracked us, we need to move forward as well. In addition to that, we've gone from the #1 most research-intensive democracy and economy on the globe, R&D investments. We now, unfortunately, are no longer the most R&D intensive economy. We're number 10. Other countries are trying to beat us to the innovations of the future. In the green space, we should do that. If I'm your president, I am going to double and triple down in the investments of green technologies to create the jobs, industries, opportunities of the future on everything from battery technology all the way to biofuels. We have to do that. In addition to that, I've got the premier bill in the United States Senate on an issue that's happening right now that's related to climate change, and that is environmental injustice. What is going on in this country is so objectionable, from Superfund sites to even some of the problems with these massive corporate consolidation in the agricultural industry that's resulting in these CAFOs that are poisoning rivers and poisoning wells. And so my legislation should be made law of this land so that individuals have rights of action against these folks who are causing environmental despoilation, and that the United States government is actually doing more to clean it up. You will find in me, nobody's going to outbold me in terms of going to deal with climate change. It's fundamental why I go back to where I live. My kids have 4 times the asthma rates of suburban kids, because all of those environmental things, from the incinerators, the Superfund sites, they put in inner cities. My kids are suffering from lead in the water they drink out of bottled water in their schools. These issues are deeply personal, because you know climate change will affect the most vulnerable and the lowest income people first. Life is about purpose, not position. I don't care what title I hold. The first people to put their faith in me was a low-income community in the inner city of Newark. And I get up every day to fight to make sure that folks like them, folks like the ones in rural areas or factory towns who are suffering and often suffering the first, I'm going to fight for them and make sure that I stay true to my life purpose. Okay, thank you.
So these are familiar campaign themes for the Democratic candidates. And Cory Booker sounds the alarm on many things, like many of the candidates do. But he does it, he does it in his own way. Everybody's got their own way of doing things. And this guy is one of the more charismatic, one of the more linguistic, one of the more cerebral candidates running for president. This guy, he's almost a fire and brimstone preacher. He can really get these meetings going. He can really put the juice to it. And I would encourage you to check him out if he's in a town near you. Unless you want to talk about the Kavanaugh hearings, and then please, don't go. Don't go, and don't ruin it for everybody else. But another theme that's very familiar, and it's you're going to hear it a lot, and it's true. We've got ourselves in a hell of a shape here. We're in a hell of a hole. We're in the pit, as he mentioned earlier. And if we're going to crawl out of here, we're going to have to do it collectively. We're going to have to help each other. Here's Cory Booker again.
I'm going to ask you to volunteer more, to reach out more, to be active more. It wasn't a bunch of men down in Washington that got together one day in a huddle around 1900 and said, you know what, it's time for those women to have the right to vote. Strom Thurmond didn't come down one day and say, I've seen the light, those Negro people deserve some rights. No. All the change that we made in this country came from rooms like this of people who made an extraordinary commitment to the cause of our country. And we are in a time that this country is hurting and needs more. And so I want to end by telling you hope and why this has been two of the most hopeful years of my life. Because hope is the active conviction that despair will not have the last word.
And you know, these campaign stops can be fun too, particularly with a guy like Cory Booker, because he's smart, and what's that mean? That means he's funny. The guy's clever. He's got a great story about attending the inauguration of Donald Trump. Here it is.
Let me tell you, I went to the inauguration. People are like, you should boycott Donald Trump's inauguration. I respect the presidency too much. I stood there, and a part of me said, well, maybe he'll give a speech, even though his campaign was about divisions and sexism and dividing people. Maybe he'll give a unifying, maybe he'll give malice towards none, charity towards all. Well, no. There was a whole lot of malice and very little charity. In fact, the speech was so outrageous that George Bush turns to Bill Clinton on the way out and looks at him and goes, well, that was some strange shit.
That's hilarious. That's a great little story. And like I always tell folks, if you're students of your 1960s pop music, it's a very strange world we live in, Master Jack, and it's getting stranger all the time. So thank you, Cory Booker, for that story, and I guess thanks to George Bush for saying that, although, God, I never thought I would be thanking George Bush for anything, but there you go. Well, we're coming down the home stretch. The podcast is about out of time. Matter of fact, we're over time, probably because I've babbled too much, not because Cory Booker has. But let's get his final remarks on here, because it's a nice closing, and then stick around, because to my mind, there's an elephant in the room. There's a big question that wasn't asked at any one of the campaign stops that I attended, one in Indianola and one up in Ames. But being your erstwhile reporter, Podcast by George was not going to let the opportunity go by without posing that question. And that comes up right after these closing comments.
I want you to caucus for me, but whatever you do between now and 600 days from now, whatever you do, don't let this election be small. Don't let it be about just one man and one office. Don't let it just be about what you're against. Let this be the moment in American history that we yet again revive ideals of civic grace, that we call upon our neighbors to have a more courageous empathy for those people who are hurting, those people who are left out, those people who can't afford their health care, those people who are getting starved in public education. Let this be a moment where we not just show courageous empathy, but we revive ideals of love and seek a beloved community. If we could make this a big election, a big moment for America, yeah, we're in the pit, but we can go to the palace. And why do I say pit and palace? It's because at another place of national tragedy, the Lorraine Motel where Martin Luther King was slain, written right there, a challenge to all of us, are the words from the Torah, the words from the Quran, and the words from the Bible. They were the words uttered by Joseph's brothers before they saw him with his coat of many colors, the interpreter of dreams, and they threw him into the pit. Well, he rose from that pit. He didn't die. He went to the palace. And so they put those words right there where Martin Luther King was slain. And I leave you with those words today. It's the call to every one of us who were founded on a nation who had great vision. The words written right there where Martin Luther King slain are, "Behold, here cometh the dreamer. Let us slay him and see what becomes of the dream. Well, it's time for this generation to dream again. Dream that we can save this planet from peril. Dream that we can have cathedrals of learning for our kids. Dream that we can have health care for all. It's time for defiant dreams, daring dreams, and bold dreams. And if we dream together and work together and struggle together and turn common pain into common purpose, I promise you, we won't just elect a new president in the White House. We will, as a whole, as a nation, we will rise. Thank you.
Well, okay, so what follows normally at a Cory Booker event like this are photo opportunities, and he is the king of the selfie. Cory Booker is. I mean, the guy's 6'3", like he has mentioned. He's a former tight end. I mean, this guy's got long arms. He's great. He can hold that everybody's cell phone up. They each give him their cell phones, and he holds them up there. I mean, he takes perfect selfies. You don't need a selfie stick with this guy because he knows how to do it and he gets it done. Well, everybody wanted one of those. But I wanted to ask this question, and the question is about him being a vegan. I got nothing against that. That's great, as a matter of fact. I'm an animal lover. I love animals. But he's in Iowa. He's giving his speeches, the two that I saw, in Warren and Story counties. These are two really big pork-producing counties in particular. And so my question for him had to do with the raising and slaughtering of animals, and he's such an animal lover. And also, remember, in context, it's also believed to be one of the biggest contributors to climate change because of methane and all of those issues associated with the raising and killing of animals, and of course the environmental concerns with the manure and the fouling of the waters and so on. So anyway, here it comes, and listen to how the questioning goes with Cory. He's a heck of a nice guy, folks, and he's got a great sense of humor, as you'll hear, and he's great at wordplay. This guy is great at alliteration. I mean, he knows how to put these things together. So here it comes. Here's the question. Yeah, it's Podcast by George. That's the name of it.
I like Podcast by George.
You gotta like
and
that.
Even though your podcasters can't see it, you have a marvelous haircut.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you got that in common. Well, it's a tough question, kind of. We've never had a vegan president before. You're here in the state of Iowa. There's a huge industry associated with the slaughtering and processing of animals.
Yes.
What kind of message do you have to people that are making their livelihoods that way?
Let's continue to live a free country. I don't think voters are really concerned about what's on my plate. I think they're concerned about what's a part of my policies. And I'm a guy right now fighting for independent producers. I've joined forces with a lot of folks to try to stop the kind of corporate consolidation that's hurting people. So I think what's happening to those kind of farmers is utterly ridiculous, and you're going to loin for my work that I am pro-business people, whether they're producing cattle or they're producing the kind of manufacturing we do in the heartland, like steel and automobiles.
That's great. That's a tough question. That's a great answer.
Okay, I hope you didn't mind my dad humor in there.
Yeah, I know. I loved it. Thank you very much.
It's good. I want your people to say that I heard from Cory Booker, and he sounds right on my issues.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, so there you go. I mean, go back and count those puns up. I mean, there's a lot of humor there from a guy that wasn't expecting that question. So that's pretty impressive. And the way he played that off and handled that, obviously, he's not going to come down against the raising and killing of animals in the state of Iowa. Although, if I were him, I might have said something. Well, maybe, I could suggest or recommend that we try to eat a little less bacon. Maybe we, and if you've been to the state fair, I think we probably could get by with eating a little less, period. But anyway, that's for another podcast for another day. For right now, that's another podcast by George.